días, ¿cómo están? Sean bienvenidos. Es para mí un gusto recibirlos esta mañana de webinar para empezar bien el día. Jueves con un poquito de frío, pero con un poquito soleado, que nos ha estado lloviendo. Entonces, prepárense su cafecito para que el día de hoy podamos tocar temas importantes de control de calidad. Es para mí un placer tenerlos por acá. Les doy la más cordial bienvenida a nombre de Laboratorios Licón, así como de LGC Seracare. Y, por supuesto, el doctor Paulo Pereira, quien es nuestro expositor el día de hoy, que nos va a compartir mucha información relevante en cuestión de la aplicación de los materiales de control de tercera opinión para serología infecciosa bajo un enfoque global. La intención de este webinar es poderles proporcionar información de cómo se maneja esto en todas partes del mundo, cuáles son las directrices internacionales, cuáles son los requisitos para poder tener buenas prácticas dentro del laboratorio. Y pues bueno, como parte de esto, les preparamos este webinar y es para mí un gusto recibirlos esta mañana. Espero que les sea de mucha utilidad. Al final vamos a tener sesión de preguntas y respuestas y pues bueno, por ahí tenemos una sorpresa para quien haga la pregunta más interesante y que sea de relevancia para aplicación en los bancos de sangre. Entonces les pido que por favor nos compartan sus preguntas en el chat de Facebook y estaremos con ustedes para poder resolver sus dudas. Comenzamos.
Welcome and thank you for joining the webinar. It's an honor to speak with you, the frontline technicians in Mexican blood banks. Briefly, I hold a PhD in biotechnology with a specialty in microbiology, and I have over 15 years of experience as quality coordinator and manager at the Portuguese Institute of Blood and Transplantation. Currently, I serve as postdoctoral researcher and director of R&D there. I'm also an expert in the European Medicines Agency in the in vitro diagnostic medical devices panel. I have co-authored key guidelines for the CLSCI and Eurochem on quality control for qualitative tests. Before I begin, I would like to clarify that the views and opinions expressed in this presentation are entirely my own and do not necessarily reflect the perspectives or policies of the institutions with which I am affiliated. I have authored the book Quality Control of Qualitative Tests for Medical Laboratories, the first of its kind dedicated to this field. A more in-depth discussion on qualitative QC is published in this book. It includes a CD with spreadsheets and case studies. For more details on internal QC, see Chapter 7. The book is available on medlabquality.com, Westcard QC, and Amazon.com. Today's presentation will start with internal quality control, abbreviated to IQC. So we'll start with IQC principles in medical labs, then cover challenges with qualitative tests and examine core IQC concepts. We will discuss quality control materials, practical implementations, and troubleshooting. Real-world case studies will illustrate these strategies, and we will conclude with key takeaways for effective IQC practice. So today we'll analyze Mexican regulatory requirements for internal quality control in blood banks, examining how these influence daily practice. We will cover key IQC principles for qualitative testing in blood banks and discuss best practice to ensure test reliability and accuracy. We'll also identify common challenges in implementing IQC for blood banks and discuss practical solutions to enhance test reliability and efficiency. Lastly, we will focus on how proper IQC practice not only ensure regulatory compliance but also protect blood supplies and patient safeties. This approach covers both the practical and regulatory aspects of quality control in blood banking. Now, brief introductions to internal quality control in medical laboratories in blood banks. So, in our work, combining technical, management, and regulatory practice is crucial. These interconnected tasks, especially in internal quality control, rely on good practice, which is a key word here, like defined procedures, continuous monitoring, and swift corrective action. So this proactive approach ensures quality, builds trust, and prioritizes patient safety in blood banks. Let's remember that quality control is always a path towards meeting requirements and that you may have some bumpy roads. Now let's start with the Mexican requirements for human blood and its components for therapeutic purposes. Let's discuss an upcoming revision of Mexico's official standard which governs blood banks. The standard specifies that tests for transfusion-transmissible infections must detect antigens, antibodies, DNA or RNA for key pathogens, including Treponema pallidum, hepatitis B and C virus, HIV types 1 and 2, and Trypanosoma cruzi. These tests are crucial for ensuring blood safety for therapeutic use. In addition to the core testing requirements, Mexican regulations also allow for optional testing of other infectious agents to further ensure blood safety. These additional tests include Brucella, Plasmodium, Toxoplasma, GTLV types 1 and 2, hepatitis E virus, and other relevant agents. These optional tests provide an extra layer of protection, especially in high-risk cases. The Mexican regulations also set clinical specific sensitivity and specificity targets for key pathogens in blood banks. So let's remember, clinical sensitivity is the fraction of the positive results in relation to the number of the individuals with the condition, for example, patients. The clinical specificity is the fractions of the negative results in relation to the number of subjects without that condition, for example, healthy subjects. For example, tests for hepatitis B, hepatitis C, and HIV-1-2 must have a clinical sensitivity of at least 99.5% and a clinical specificity of at least 99%. Other pathogens like Trypanosoma cruzi require slightly lower but still rigorous standards to ensure the reliability and safety of blood supplies. According to Mexican regulations, blood transfusion service must have internal quality control system covering every step from donor selection to the final destination of blood units and products. This comprehensive approach ensures quality and safety throughout the entire transfusion process, protecting both donors and recipients. Mexican regulations also mandate quality control for reagents used in tests for transfusion transmissible agents. This includes using known controls, negative and weak positive, to assess clinical sensitivity and clinical specificity. Importantly, weak positive controls must not exceed 3 times the cutoff value. The regulations requirement of using weak positive controls up to 3 times the cutoff aligns with my own publications, where I recommend a range of 1.5 to 3 times the cutoff. Signals below 1.5 times carry a higher risk of being misclassified as false negatives, principally due to their imprecision, so they aren't advisable for reliable quality control. The frequency of these controls should be established based on quality assurance planning. Lastly, Mexican regulations require that the use of a weak positive control is in addition to the manufacturer's controls, both with different purposes. The control material can be sourced from a trusted supplier or created in-house. Additionally, control charts with zone rules should be used to monitor test performance and ensure consistent quality. Now let's move into the terminology. In internal quality control, using a harmonized vocabulary is essential. Clear, standardized terms help ensure that everyone across different labs, departments, and even countries understands the process in the same way. Let's start with internal quality control itself, or IQC. IQC is defined as the process that aims to detect and correct potential errors by conducting tests each time an analysis or series of analysis is performed using the same technique. It's essentially a continuous quality check designed to catch issues early and maintain consistency and reliability in our results. In simple terms, IQC uses control samples to verify that laboratories' results conform to expected standards, confirming that our processes are working accurately. IQC is primarily designed to ensure the stability of results with these analytical runs, minimizing the risk of reporting false results. Critically, it also helps prevent adverse post-transfusion reactions, such as infections. By maintaining rigorous quality checks, IQC enables us to deliver accurate and safe outcomes, effectively safeguarding patient health. Next, we have the concept of an analytical run, which is closely related with IQC. So, analytical run refers to a lab procedure where, in a single session, we analyze multiple blood samples, usually anticoagulated blood, serum, or plasma. This is in a period up to 24 hours. So, during this session, we apply the same method, reagents, controls, equipment, and instruments to all samples. This control setup ensures uniform conditions, reducing variability across tests. In metrology, qualitative examination refers to processes that yield nominal property values. So, in metrology, an examination is a term for a qualitative test. Meanwhile, ISO 15189 defines examination as a set of operations to determine a property's value or characteristic. So, in 15189, examination could be a qualitative test or could be a quantitative test. So, as we saw, the metrology and ISO definitions of examination are not fully harmonized. This difference highlights the need for alignment in terminology across standards. For those interested in standardized terminology, there are several key resources available. The CLSCI provides a harmonized terminology database, while the BIPM offers the International Vocabulary of Metrology, VIM, with basic concepts and terms. Additionally, the IFCC UPAC 2017 recommendations provide the qualitative vocabulary specific to clinical laboratory science. These resources are publicly accessible and are essential for maintaining consistency in metrology and laboratory terminology. We have here several links. So, let's briefly review the principles of quality control. We must understand the key principle to apply successfully an IQC approach. So, first, what is a qualitative property? When we talk about clinical testing, it's important to understand the difference between qualitative and quantitative results. Quantitative tests measure and report a specific value of a property in clinical samples, such as number of red blood cells. On the other hand, qualitative tests describe the characteristics of a property by categorizing it. These categories can be binary, like positive or negative, nominal with no specific order, or ordinal where there is an order or ranking. This distinction helps us apply the correct methods and controls for each type of test, ensuring accuracy and relevance in our results. To be clear, let's look at some examples. When we talk about qualitative properties in testing, it's all about categorizing outcomes into types like qualitative characteristics. Unlike quantitative analysis, where we report numeric values, qualitative tests give us categorical results, such as positive or negative, or approved or rejected. This is especially relevant for tests that evaluate properties without numeric measurement, providing clear, dichotomous answers. Take blood typing for example. We observe agglutination to determine blood type. If the blood cells clump, it indicates a specific antigen is present, so a positive reaction. Another example is a rapid antibody test for the hepatitis C virus, where a red line shows a positive result, while no line means negative. These binary and ordered results, yes or no, positive or negative, don't involve any ranking or degree. Understanding this distinction is critical because it shapes how we interpret and apply these results. In practice, it emphasizes the importance of precision in quick, often high-stakes assessments, ensuring our decisions are based on accurate, clear-cut findings. Otherwise, when we shift from nominal to ordinal categorizations in qualitative testing, we gain an additional layer of insight. In nominal categorizations, as we saw, results tell us simply whether a condition is present or absent. A straightforward yes or no. But with ordinal categorization, we introduce an order or ranking to the qualitative classification based on a decision point or cutoff. For instance, in immunoassay, we classify results as positive or negative depending on whether they meet or exceed the cutoff, which can provide insight into the strength of an antibody response. This graded information is useful for understanding a patient's stage of immunity or exposure level. Similarly, in real-time PCR, we use a limit of detection or load as cutoff. So a signal below the load is classified as negative, meaning the target wasn't detected. A signal above this limit is classified as positive, confirming the presence of the target. This approach helps us make nuanced decisions, informing patient care with a greater level of detail than a simple nominal yes or no result. So now the principles of internal quality control. So let's focus on false results as a key source of uncertainty in blood bank screening immunoassays, especially with low concentrations near the cutoff. In these examples, we see three different cutoffs. The ideal cutoff has low imprecision and no bias, reducing misclassification risk, is this one with a green histogram. However, a highly imprecise cutoff leads to misclassification near the threshold, as shown by the flat histogram. Alternatively, a precise but biased cutoff also increases misclassification risk. To manage this, we can introduce a gray zone around the cutoff, which helps reduce false positives and negatives. Remember, cutoffs are designed based on specific sensitivity, specificity, balance, but are always affected by random and systematic errors. What is the risk of misclassifying weak signals? Well, for a better understanding of the signals, we will consider samples from infected and healthy individuals. Let's consider the signal to cutoff ratio, where the cutoff is equal to 1. As we saw, the cutoff is the decision point for the classification. In this hypothetical case in infinite, all samples are classified as true positives and true negatives. So 100% clinical sensitivity and 100% clinical specificity. However, a scenario without a risk of false results is unrealistic, so this is not what happens in the real world. So let's see a real-world example. On the left are the true negatives, and on the right the true positives. However, in the middle we have weak positives and weak negatives, where misclassifications like false negatives and false positives are more likely to occur. This is a real-world challenge, as values near the cutoff are harder to interpret accurately and require further study. So this is what really happens, and of course this is a major concern when we talk about weak results. So, when we analyze the impact of data variability on the accuracy of a diagnostic cutoff, we are fundamentally discussing the risk of misclassification in qualitative test results, specifically the dangers of reporting false results. In this last example, we see two cutoffs, cutoff 1 and cutoff 2. So cutoff 2 is shifted or biased relative to cutoff 1. This shift has significant consequence as it increases the likelihood of false negatives, shown in the overlap area between the green and red curves. Imagine this scenario in the context of a blood bank where false negatives represent a critical failure. Here, if a blood sample is misclassified as negative, an affected unit could be mistakenly cleared for transfusion. This risk isn't just theoretical, it's a reality that stems from the inherent variability in text data. As the cutoff shifts, either due to imprecision or bias in the testing process, the risk of missing true positives escalates, potentially leading to severe health risks. So we need to protect the cutoff. And of course, the IQC is the critical tool to help us to do that. So this example highlights why it is absolutely essential to implement a robust internal quality control system. Reliable IQC is our primary defense against this kind of variability. By continuously monitoring and adjusting for precision and bias, IQC helps us maintaining the integrity of the cutoff, ensuring it remains as accurate as possible. The variability and the potential consequences underscore the importance of a well-designed IQC system to safeguard the accuracy and reliability of diagnostic tests, particularly in critical applications like blood banking. Now let's focus on also an important point for IQC, which is the methodological and qualitative traceability. So when you talk about traceability of qualitative properties, we are referring to how we ensure accuracy and reliability in our test results. This involves using a cutoff material or materials that are methodologically traceable, either an internal reference from the manufacturer or an external reference material established when the cutoff value is set. This assigned value helps us calibrate our system before use, ensuring they remain accurate. The traceability requirements for both calibrators and verification controls are detailed in international standards like ISO 17511, which guide us in maintaining high quality and reliable testing process. Let's discuss the traceability of qualitative properties. Unlike quantitative measurements, which we can link to numeric standards, qualitative traceability is about connecting categorical results like positive, negative, or pass-fail to reference standards through a validated calibration chain. This ensures that even qualitative tests have reliable, traceable outcomes back to quality reference materials, ensuring consistency. For example, samples used to determine proportion of positive results should trace back to the clinical diagnosis of individuals who are classified, such as infected or not infected. Here, traceability might link to diagnosis itself or to a comparative method. Whether we are dealing with nominal tests like pass-fail or ordinal tests involving ranking, traceability is crucial for making reliable comparisons, especially in clinical diagnostics or comparative testing. Well, the requirements for quality control materials is a critical issue in an IQC system. So let's discuss the selection and suitability of IQC materials. First, IQC materials need to be fit for purpose. They must be appropriate for the specific examination process in question. Second, stability. Stability is crucial. The materials should remain stable to reliably measure the properties of interest over time. Lastly, matrix similarity is essential. IQC materials should closely match the patient sample matrix to ensure that test results are accurate and reflective of real-world conditions. As a continuation of the previous slides, let's cover 3 additional criteria for IQC materials. First, they should respond similarly to patient samples during testing, which helps ensure accuracy in real conditions. Second, they need to provide clinically relevant challenges, allowing us to verify the decision thresholds effectively. They should cover the full measurement range of the test method, ensuring reliable performance across all levels. Now let's focus on weak signals. As we know, which are those close to the cutoff where there's a significant risk of misclassification. In blood banks, this is especially critical because weak positive signals carry the risk of false negatives. Let's repeat, a major concern when it comes to patient safety. Weak signal samples are created by diluting a high signal sample. While they aren't exactly the same as a seroconversion sample, they are the best option we have. So this difference is due to factors like antibody affinity and avidity, which don't replicate in the same way in diluted samples. So quality control materials should include a weak positive control specifically designed to monitor these borderline cases. As we previously discussed, Mexican regulation requires as control that should not exceed 3 times the cutoff value. So using a quality control material with a signal not exceeding 3 times the cutoff is crucial. It aligns with the broad range of materials available on the market. Setting this limit allows us to effectively detect weak positives while minimizing false negatives, ensuring reliable results without compromising test clinical sensitivity. This approach is practical, effective, and supported by data, so this weak positive control can be sourced from a reliable provider or prepared by the laboratory, ensuring accurate sensitivity checks in the most vulnerable range. So together these factors help us maintain high quality and reliability in our testing processes. Let's focus on the benefits of using third-party control materials. These materials sourced from reliable external providers offer several benefits. They often use a human matrix, closely resembling patient samples, which improves test accuracy. They are also highly stable, lasting over a year in typical lab conditions, which reduce the needs for frequent replacements. Cost-wise, third-party controls are often more economical compared to in-house preparations, and they are specifically designed for compatibility with commercial tests. On downside is that some of these materials lack a weak signal, which can be non-conformant with the Mexican regulation, but as I said, there are a lot of materials on the market that satisfy the regulation. However, the overall reliability, stability, and compatibility of third-party materials make them a strong option for quality control in our labs. Now let's consider in-house control materials as an option, but only for specific cases, mainly rare tests where stable commercial materials simply aren't available. In-house controls allows us to use our own human samples, which can be critical for niche or uncommon tests. However, this option should be seen as secondary. The trade-off with third-party materials is generally unfavorable, as in-house controls require specialized equipment, skilled technicians, and a lot of preparation time. Additionally, stability is often a concern, leading to higher risk of false alarms and increased costs. So, while in-house controls have their place for rare cases, third-party materials are usually the better choice for consistency, stability, and efficiency. often should we test control materials? In our blood banks, it's essential to test internal quality control materials in every analytical run. This is to ensure we catch any potential errors that might lead to false negatives. To further strengthen this process, we should not place the control materials in the same position each way. So it needs to be representative of the system. So we could also use Excels, for example, random number generation, or select a different position in the run each time. So here you have the Spanish function. This randomizing approach helps us avoid any predictable patterns and ensures our testing remains as accurate and sensitive as possible, supporting high-quality results in our lab. Now let's go to another topic, implementation and monitoring of internal quality control. We'll center here the discussion in two different types of charts: the variable charts and the attribute charts. The variable charts use numerical results. The attribute charts use the qualitative characteristics. So let's focus on the specific example of the variable charts, and in this case the well-known Levy-Jennings. Here's the classic diagram of precision, accuracy, and uncertainty essential for quality control review. So on the bottom left, we see the ideal, so results are precise and accurate, clustered tightly around the true value. So this is the ideal situation. This is what happens in a stable process. So in this case, we also have, so results are precise and accurate, but also clustered tightly around the true value, as I said. The upper left shows precision without accuracy, so consistent results missing the target due to systematic error. The upper right is the worst, imprecise and inaccurate, reflecting both random and systematic errors. On the bottom right, we see accuracy without precision, so results spread out but averaging to the target. So measurement uncertainty increases as both bias and imprecisions rise, reflecting greater variability and deviations from true values. So this reminded us precision isn't enough if there's bias. Managing both random and systematic errors is critical for reliable outcomes. Let's see more in depth what is happening with precision and bias in QC charts. So in Levy-Jennings charts, we monitor results over time to identify patterns, whether measurements are consistently biased, indicating a systematic error, or erratic, suggesting random error. Let's consider a chart applied to an immunoassay. So by visualizing both precision and accuracy, this figure helps us appreciate why we use these control charts. Levy-Jennings charts allow us to catch these errors early, ensuring that our processes stay stable and within acceptable limits, ultimately safeguarding the quality and reliability of our test results. This figure illustrates the Levy-Jennings chart by showing data points across a normal distribution. Here we can see the limits at 1, 2, and 3 standard deviations from the mean, representing control levels for evaluating our process. The shaded areas on the left, with the percentages of 68%, 95%, and 99.7%, correspond to the likelihood of values failing within those ranges if the process is stable. When the data points stay within limits controlled specifically within limits within plus minus 2 standard deviations or plus minus 3 standard deviations, we can consider the process both precise and accurate, so under stable conditions. However, any points trending beyond these control limits may indicate issues such as systematic bias or random error and prompt further investigation. This approach is foundational in quality control, allowing us to detect shifts early and maintaining reliable consistency testing results. Just a very important note. We could, of course, compute the average in standard deviation, preferably using a minimum of 20 days, and this corresponds to the number of useful days in a month, or probably even better, at least a number equal or higher than 31 runs. And of course, the suggestion is to use charts where you could have mobile average and mobile standard deviations, because of course the average and the standard deviation that you have today is not the same that you have in the next 3 or 6 or 12 months. In these David-Jennings charts, we see a pattern indicating instability due to systematic error. Here, although the points are precise, they fall close to each other, they are consistently shifted away from the target mean, leading to what we call precise but incorrect. This shift suggests a systematic deviation, which could be due to issues like calibration drift or a consistent bias in the measurement system. Monitoring for these patterns is essential in quality control, as it helps us detect when results are reliable in precision but not accurate, prompting corrective action to avoid misinterpretation in patient results. In this third Levy-Jennings chart, we observe instability due to random error resulting in imprecise but accurate. Although the data points over around the mean, there's significant spread or dispersion, indicating random error without a consistent pattern. This large variation can make it difficult to detect subtle changes and can impact result reliability. Random error like this can arise from factors like variability in technique or environmental conditions. Detecting such dispersion is critical, as it signals the need for tighter control to maintain the reliability of results. In this Levy-Jennings charts, we are seeing a combination of systematic and random errors that create an imprecise and incorrect scenario. The data points are dispersed widely, showing random error with large variability, but we also see a consistent deviation from the mean, indicating systematic error. This pattern suggests a lack of stability with both types of error impacting the reliability of results. So it's essential to address both sources of error to bring the process back into a stable, accurate state. This scenario represents the worst case outcome where both systematic and random errors are present. Dr. James Westcott refers to this as total analytical error, or the overall deviations from true results. Now, probably the most weighted question: which rules should we use in qualitative tests? Most laboratories are familiar with and regularly use Westcott rules for internal quality control. But today let's examine if these rules are the optimal choice for serological examinations and nucleic acid testing not. Are they truly suited to meet the specific needs of these testing methods? Let's find out. The Westcott rules were originally developed with quantitative tests in mind, as their authors specifically suggested. However, applying these rules to qualitative tests like serological examinations and NAT introduce significantly issues because you are operating within a different paradigm. So, in qualitative testing, results are typically binary, positive or negative, rather than a spectrum of values, making the quantitative focus Westcott rules unsuitable. So, using Westcott rules for qualitative tests can lead to what we call false alarms. This happens when runs are flagged as out of control even though no significant variation exists, effectively creating alarms in otherwise stable testing sequences. So, what do we do when faced with numerous false alarms? For the lab, this creates an operational nightmare absolute chaos consuming time and resources to investigate issues that don't actually exist. This experience shows us the need for a different approach, one grounded in qualitative-based thinking. To avoid these disruptions, we need to steer away from using published Western rules for serological nucleic acid tests. They simply don't fit the purpose. The question then is, which rules should we use for quality control in these settings? We need to explore and implement rules specifically designed for qualitative methods to achieve reliable, practical outcomes. So, for qualitative tests, we need a qualitative mindset when setting control rules. Using a weak positive sample helps us monitor clinical sensitivity, aiming to minimize the risk of reporting false negatives, which would indicate a loss of clinical sensitivity. On the other hand, a negative sample is essential for monitoring clinical specificity, helping to reduce the risk of false positives, where clinical specificity might be compromised. By focus on these controls, we target the specific risks relevant to each test type, ensuring our quality checks are both appropriate and effective for the nature of qualitative testing. So, I suggest using a 1-2S warning rule as a warning rule and 1-3S as a rejection rule. So, these rules are used to control leaf-Jennings charts for qualitative tests, especially when you are working with weak materials. Well, the idea is that a rejection rule like 1-3S should be violated only when there's a meaningful risk of losing clinical sensitivity, essentially when there's a significant chance of false negatives. So, this would indicate a real problem with the test's reliability for detecting true positives. On the other hand, a 1-2S warning rule serves as an early indicator, flagging any unexpected variation without necessarily pointing to a critical loss of sensitivity. For controlling negative signals, we could apply the same rules, 1-2S as a warning and 1-3S as a rejection, or alternatively, we could use attribute charts focused solely on agreement. We'll see this type of charts later. So, since our primary concern is not the risk of false positives, these control charts are designed to monitor consistency in the negative results. These rules allow us to catch and assess fluctuation before they escalate. The 1-3S rule for qualitative leaf-Jennings charts requires a different application than the traditional Westcott rules. Emphasizing, we cannot apply this rule as we would with quantitative testing. In this context, the rule is set to monitor and verify specific criterion, preventing false negatives. Remember that clinical criteria always prevail over statistical ones, and it is on this basis that we suggest the following assumptions. So, when the control material signal falls below the mean -3 standard deviation, it suggests a potential decrease in sensitivity that could impact clinical outcomes. However, unlike quantitative tests, we allow some tolerance due to the nature of qualitative tests. This tolerance helps us avoid overreacting to random variations in the control material that don't pose a real risk of false negatives. The idea is that we only take action if the signal suggests a consistent pattern or sensitivity loss rather than responding to a single outlier. Even if the 1-3S rule is technically violated, if the signal remains above the cutoff, we can continue reporting results without concern. Therefore, this rule is more about monitoring for significant risk rather than strictly rejecting every deviation. It ensures that we stay focused on clinical impact, only intervening when there's a clear potential for error, rather than disrupting workflow for minor or chance-based fluctuations. When we talk about the risk of the 1-3s rule being violated in stable conditions, we're referring to a probability, not a certainty. It's crucial to understand that the statistical rules like 1-3s are based on probabilities, meaning that pseudo-violations can occur simply due to natural random variation, even when there's no actual problem with the process. For example, in stable conditions, we can expect around 0.135 violations per 100 runs if we are only considering one-sided deviations. So this isn't a guaranteed failure in every 100 runs, but rather a likelihood. So it could happen. So if you are running 500 or 1000 tests, these probabilities head up, and you may experience a pseudo violation just by chance. For blood banks, this is especially important to consider, as large batches or frequent testing could increase the chance of these false alarms occurring periodically. So, if you see regular pseudo violations without any real underlying issue, it's essentially to recognize this is as a statistical probability rather than a system failure. This understanding helps avoiding unnecessary interruptions in your workflow due to false alarms and keeps your focus on maintaining true control of critical variations that matter. Now let's look at the figure on the next slide to see how the rules works in practice. In this figure, we have the example of an immunoassay. We see a 1-3s rule violation where the control signal has fallen close to the borderline but just below the mean -3 standard deviations. This triggers a partial rejection of the analytical run. What does that mean for us? Positive samples within this run can still be considered valid because they will be always positive. However, the negative samples should be carefully retested after addressing the underlying issue. It's important to highlight that any corrective action taken should follow the identification of the error source. The goal is to resolve the issue before retesting, ensuring that the subsequent results maintain reliability. Now, blood banks should also be aware that a rule violation like this could happen under stable conditions purely due to natural statistical variation. If this is the case and no actual issue is detected, the best course of action would be to continue maintaining best practice without unnecessary adjustments. Now let's focus when we should apply attribute charts. These charts are specifically designed for qualitative data, making them highly suitable for monitoring tests with purely categorical results like nucleic acid tests or pure qualitative tests like a blood group. So these charts don't work with numerical data like Levy-Jennings charts, so they are aligned with qualitative examination needs. Statistically, attribute charts are less sensitive to small fluctuations, which is both an advantage and a limitation. They focus on catching major issues rather than minor variations. Attribute charts offer a simplified approach for monitoring qualitative test outcomes since they focus on categorical rather than continuous data. They help us maintain control over qualitative assays without the added complexity of dealing with numerical variations. Here, out of control signals would indicate actual false results. So our rejection rules targets of risk of false negatives focus on sensitivity, while our warning rules watch for any sign of false positives, keeping specificity in check. So this means a significant issue in either test sensitivity or specificity has likely occurred, requiring immediate attention for control materials. So we recommend using low reactivity control materials similar to weak signals. For example, this could include a sample showing a weak agglutination or an RNA positive sample close to the limit of detection. These materials help us detect subtle issues in test sensitivity. For attribute charts in qualitative test control, we use two main rules: the warning rule and the rejection rule. So, as we said previously, the warning rule focuses on clinical specificity, meaning it's designed to catch potential false positives. So this rule alerts when an unexpected variation suggests a risk of false positives, helping us maintain high standards without automatically rejecting the test run. On the other hand, now more specifically, the rejection rule focuses on clinical sensitivity or the risk of false negatives, similar to what happened on the variables chart. So this rule is triggered when there's a lack of sensitivity, ensuring that no false negatives are reported, which is crucial for patient safety. So, in this attribute chart, we are applying a qualitative control approach that's well suited for tests like real-time PCR for RNA detection or ABO blood grouping, where results are categorical rather than numerical. So the chart is divided into zones. The green agreement zone at the bottom represents results that are in control, meaning they match the expected outcomes. For example, a clear positive or negative in an RNA test or correct identification of an ABO blood group. Above this, we have the discrepant zone in light red. So in this zone, we have the discrepant results, so results without agreement. If a test result falls into the discrepant zone, as we've seen here, you can see here at the run number 18, it's flagged as an out of control result. For a PCR test, this might mean the result didn't meet expected sensitivity, potentially missing an RNA detection. In an ABO group, it could signal an expected reaction pattern that doesn't align with the known blood type. This approach focuses on catching serious errors without tracking the minor fluctuations. It's ideal for qualitative testing because we are directly identifying discrepancies in critical outcomes like false negatives or positives, rather than managing continuous data. This way, attribute charts give us a clear and focused way to ensure accuracy in critical tests, again, like real-time PCR or ABO blood typing. So, to conclude, to ensure our testing methods are fit for purpose, we should implement quality control measures specifically tailored for qualitative tests in blood banks. This aligns with Mexican regulations guaranteeing the highest standards of quality and safety in transfusion. By emphasizing transfusion safety, we are committed to minimizing risks for patients through reliable testing. Good quality control practice, including robust and consistent internal procedures, are crucial for reducing errors in these tests. Using internal controls helps us quickly identify and correct discrepancies, enhancing reliability and consistency in our results. This dedication to stability and precision ultimately has a positive impact on diagnosis and treatment, supporting safe and effective clinical decisions in transfusion medicine. Thank you.
Muchas gracias a todos. Muchas gracias, doctor Paulo, por toda esta valiosa información. Bueno, como parte del proyecto que tenemos nosotros con este aseguramiento de la calidad dentro de Grupo Licón, pues bueno, la intención es poder proporcionarles todos estos lineamientos, los enfoques internacionales a nivel de riesgo. Me parece súper pertinente que podamos conocer esta información y sobre todo saber que existen diferentes enfoques, ¿no? Enfoques en el sentido de cómo podemos asegurar nuestras pruebas a un nivel clínico, Creo que toda la información que hemos podido tener la oportunidad de revisar en este webinar ha sido de alto impacto, como bien pusimos en el título de este webinar, porque justo lo que queremos es poder poner un granito de arena, ¿no? Para la seguridad del paciente y para dar más herramientas para la sangre segura. Y pues bueno, estamos listos para la sesión de preguntas y respuestas. Para los que no estuvieron desde un principio, les comento, vamos a tener un regalo sorpresa. Bueno, ya no va a ser sorpresa, les voy a decir, a la mejor pregunta que tengamos, les vamos a regalar un libro físico. Este es el libro del doctor Paulo Pereira, que es justo el control de calidad en pruebas cualitativas para el laboratorio clínico, y pues trae justo este enfoque, cómo podemos asegurar desde un panorama clínico la parte del aseguramiento de la calidad dentro del banco de sangre. Sabemos que dentro del enfoque estadístico tenemos muchas herramientas que podemos utilizar, pero justo vamos ahora con este panorama de la seguridad del paciente a poder aportar más información con herramientas y sobre todo con este tipo de información que contamos como es el libro del doctor Paulo. Entonces, bueno, sus preguntas son bienvenidas y le doy también la bienvenida al doctor Paulo Pereira, que está con nosotros para resolver todas sus preguntas, y también a la licenciada Ana Mayolín de LGC Seracare, que también nos acompaña para apoyarnos con el tema de la traducción y cualquier situación que ustedes requieran que se tenga que explicar un poquito más, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, como parte de las preguntas que tengo por acá, tengo una que menciona qué medidas se recomiendan para minimizar los falsos positivos o negativos en los gráficos de atributos.
Hello to all. Well, the key here is so when you think about what practice you should have, of course, you are talking about good practice, but this could be applied to the attribute charts or to, of course, to variables charts. So, of course, to minimize, of course, the risk of false negatives or even false positives, of course, the keywords are good practice, and good practice are not only on analytical phase, because most of the time we are using automatic equipment, but including, of course, on the pre-analytical phase, when you talk about the storage of reagents, storage of samples, the environmental conditions, the reconstitution of reagents, and etc. So here we need, of course, to check if we have some failures on our practice. So if you are using good practice, of course, is we don't expect to have problems of false negatives or false positive results.
Ani.
Disculpa.
Hola,
Gracias. Lo que comenta el doctor es prácticamente solamente lo que es hacer buenas prácticas en el laboratorio. Eso es lo que va a minimizar todos los resultados, cómo lo manejas. Realmente es un enfoque a la cuestión que cada laboratorio tiene para hacer las mejores prácticas en general.
Muchas gracias. Tengo por acá otra pregunta que es, ¿cuál es su opinión, doctor, con respecto a que el control débil no debe superar 3 veces el punto de corte en la norma oficial mexicana con respecto a, por ejemplo, lo que sucede en otros países?
Well, in most of countries, to be honest, and of course, talking in Europe, we don't have a requirement to the use of weak signals in the control of qualitative testings like immunoassays, like nucleic acid. But of course, this is critical because, and as I said in the presentation, if you are not controlling weak cycles, so we are here missing very important sources of variance, because you are only controlling when you have very big problems, not small problems. That could be, of course, a limitation to our results. So, according to the Mexican regulation, we must, so it's not a should, we must to use a sample with an average with a maximum average of 3 times the cutoff. As I said before, I also recommend that the sample, of course, must be in Mexico, and that's a good rule to be not to be up to 3 times the cutoff, but I also suggest to be higher than 1.5 the cutoff, because If you have a sample, for instance, if you have a sample with 1.2 or 1.3 or 1.5 times the cutoff, so there is a risk of you could have in stable conditions false negatives, and that's a big problem for the internal quality control, because what you're all dealing here to minimize the chance to report weak positives, but they are true positives as false results. So I suggest to be between 1.5 times the cutoff and 3 times the cutoff.
Ok, Gise, lo que comenta el doctor realmente es una buena práctica lo que hace la norma mexicana, el tener el corte al 3.0. Pero como lo comenta, o sea, realmente también es tomar la media, ¿no? O sea, la media de si tienes 3 repeticiones y te da cierta media, obviamente utilizar. O sea, a lo mejor si vas a tener alguna ocasión, puede ser que tengas algo bajo, algo medio, algo a lo mejor que pase del 3.0, pero obviamente es importante, pues ver la cuestión pues como lo hemos comentado, o sea, que es de tu medio, ¿no? De ver cuál es el punto medio de todas tus corridas. Pero en realidad, como lo ven otros países, es una buena práctica el tener el 3.0 como señal de corte sí, de corte.
Gracias. Otra
También creo que va a continuar el doctor con más explicación.
No, it's just to note, because then, of course, it's available in the market. Of course, manufacturers with signals that are according, of course, to the Mexican regulation. But if you are using, of course, I signals, as I said, and let me repeat this again, so we cannot identify minor modifications that could be critical to the trueness of the results. So this is a very important topic in the Mexican rule, and very, of course, in the good way.
Ok, es solamente para complementar que realmente es la mejor, pues como lo comento, o sea, la mejor práctica de tener un corte bajo en ese sentido, que es la norma mexicana. Doctor, solamente como una pregunta para añadir aquí a este mismo tema. Si tu media está dando, a lo mejor digo, en ocasiones nos puede dar 3.1. ¿Qué hacemos en esa ocasión? Está todavía, digo, mientras esté en el medio, yo me imagino que eso es lo correcto para el laboratorio.
Well, because my suggestion here, because of course we have a requirement in the Mexican law, so it's above ISO 1589, etc. So it's specific from your country. So, like I said, there are available market materials beyond 3. But of course, for example, if you have a material with an average of 2.8, 2.9, of course, it's expected in stable conditions that sometimes have results, of course, below 2.8, for example, but it's expected we have some values also than this value, and sometimes we could have also values that are higher than 3. Okay, but the expected, so we talk about the average, so it's the most expected value in normal distribution. So the expected is, for example, 2.8, but sometimes you could have a value higher than that, and if you have a value higher than that, than 3, that's not a problem, because here the risk is not to misclassify the signal as false negatives, but probably the risk is to misclassify some negative high signals as false positives, and that's not a major cost of the blood bank.
claro.
Ok, perfecto. Solamente añadir, como lo comentábamos anterior, que realmente lo importante es pues el promedio, ¿no? El que estás haciendo en tu laboratorio. Realmente sí vas a tener algunas muestras o cuando estás haciendo el control de calidad que nos puede dar 2.8, 2.9, a lo mejor exceder el 3.0, pero en realidad es el promedio que se utiliza. Si el producto está estable, realmente como lo comentaba el doctor, o sea, la cuestión de tener el mejor control, digo, de calidad, que sea estable, hacer las pruebas, y tu promedio es realmente lo que es más importante. Sí, doctor.
Uh, Sorry, just a note, because usually that's what happens in audits, because sometimes when the laboratory and blood bank find the material available on the market, that material comes, of course, with an insert, and the insert reports what is the expected average. So that's what we would consider if the material is 2.5 two times, three times of the average. So the blood bank didn't need to try to see exactly the average. Of course, it could be done, no problem. But usually, the average value comes with the material when the laboratory purchases this material uh, uh, from a manufacturer.
Claro.
Ok. Sí, como, Gise, como lo comentaba el doctor, es realmente, o sea, cuando tienes el inserto del paquete lo puedes ver y obviamente señala cuál puede ser el promedio. Todo
Ujú.
es basado realmente digo, a la práctica del laboratorio, ¿no? O
Claro.
sea, que haga, lo pruebe y realmente te dé los resultados confiables, y puedas ver cuál es tu promedio en las corridas que el laboratorio ha hecho.
Claro. Fíjate que este tema para nosotros en México es muy importante
Claro,
porque justo trazándonos como estos estándares internacionales, creo que hay un poco como de falta, le voy a decir así, como de este tipo de visión a nivel internacional de cómo este punto se tiene que analizar. O sea, me refiero a, ahorita todo el enfoque que tenemos o que vimos en esta presentación, pues fue dirigido a la parte clínica. O sea, ¿cuál es el impacto? ¿Para qué hacemos control de calidad? Para dar seguridad lo más que se pueda a ese paquete sanguíneo que se va a transfundir, ¿no? Porque lo
correcto,
que menos queremos es impactar negativamente al paciente. Entonces, si hablamos con base en seguridad del paciente, debemos de tener un enfoque dirigido a la parte de la aplicación clínica. Sin embargo, cuando nos vamos a la parte de la aplicación estadística, podemos ser sumamente estrictos en cosas que no añaden valor para la seguridad clínica. Entonces,
correcto,
en ese punto, justo ahorita este tema me llama mucho la atención porque justo hemos estado como teniendo diferentes consultas referente a esta situación y pues algo que sí hemos hecho mucho hincapié que me hace mucho sentido es que justo nosotros nos hemos enfocado en trabajar en estándares internacionales para poder dar foco a la aplicación clínica que tiene el control de calidad. Si bien se hace con base estadística, pero lo que tiene más impacto es ese enfoque clínico, ¿no? Entonces, pues justo el ver que un material de control que se está utilizando para hacer control de calidad en un laboratorio o en un banco de sangre, pues por supuesto va a tener variaciones, lo vimos a lo largo de
claro,
la presentación. Estoy buscando que si yo esos datos los grafico en un gráfico de control, voy a estar viendo que los datos tienen que atravesar la media y deben de formar una distribución gaussiana normal. Si yo no logro ver eso, de primera instancia mi gráfico está mal construido. Entonces, si yo
correcto,
logro ver eso, las mismas variaciones del sistema, por supuesto, me van a generar que en algún punto un resultado pueda subirse un poco más o pueda bajarse. Y el punto más crítico es cuando se me bajan, porque quiere decir que puedo estar perdiendo sensibilidad diagnóstica y eso es un impacto mucho mayor y razón por la cual incluso en nuestra norma oficial lo dice. Dice que a todos los positivos nosotros les hacemos más, digamos, análisis y sin embargo cuando tenemos un negativo tenemos que prestarle mucho más atención a lo que está
claro,
sucediendo en el control de calidad, porque ¿por qué tenemos ese negativo? Si estamos viendo una variación importante, tiene mucho más impacto un falso negativo que un falso positivo. Y eso lo
claro,
sabemos, ¿no? Sin embargo, justo en este foco de la aplicación estadística versus la aplicación clínica, pudiera de repente como que ser un poco complejo el tener esta visión de que yo le tengo que dar seguimiento a la media de mis resultados y focalizarme en aquellos resultados que puedan subir o bajar, siempre y cuando sea una variación tal que pueda impactar clínicamente al paciente. Entonces
Eso
creo
es
que ese es
correcto.
un punto muy importante y creo que es un dato muy relevante para nosotros, la verdad.
Sí,
Es,
y la importancia es cuál es la relevancia clínica, ¿no? En cuestión de cuánto estás dando los resultados. O sea, cuál es
exactamente,
la relevancia. Eso es lo que también
exactamente.
hay que entender.
Justo. Muchas gracias, doctor. En otro punto tenemos otra pregunta que dice, ¿cuáles son las principales limitaciones de los gráficos de atributos al analizar resultados cualitativos?
Well, the attributes we could only see because first, if you consider the use of attributes and the use of the variable charts like the Levy-Jennings, uh, in both we should use, of course, a weak signal. Okay, so the weak signal should be used in Levy-Jennings and also in the attributes. So this is what I have close. The big change is that in the attribute chart is not sensible to minor changes in the process. So if I have minor changes in the process, it's not so sensitive as, for example, if the Levy-Jennings chart. Let me use this example. Let's think that you have some failure on our equipment and it's decreasing every day. Uh, the number, for example, of photons that you should have because there is a problem in the reader. Okay, just only when our result is a false negative is the only way that you have on an attribute charts to know that you have now a problem to deal. But in the Levy-Jennings charts, we could start, of course, to violate the ordering rule, the for example, the average minus two standard deviations, and you have your award. So you need to take care because this is a standard deviation. Probably if this happens again the next run, so you need to take off care because some problem is happening. So we could detect in the Levy-Jennings chart, so it's a variable chart, we could detecting early problems, and then of course in the attribute charts. So
Bueno, gracias.
whenever possible, we should use, of course, variable charts, otherwise the attribute charts, but always in the attribute charts with weak signal samples.
Ujú.
Gracias, doctor. Uh, doctor, did you say whenever possible to use variable charts? Is that what you said?
Yes, whenever possible, to use Levy-Jennings variable charts because they are more sensitive to
Claro.
detect failures in our analytical process.
Ujú.
Ok, lo que comenta el doctor es realmente la buena práctica de usar los gráficos, ¿no? En ambos, pues ayuda a utilizar puedes identificar los ciclos débiles. A veces es, obviamente, lo que se está haciendo con lo que se está manejando puede ser muy sensible. Por ejemplo, como lo mencionó, los gráficos, negativos, a veces ellos también, o sea, se pueden utilizar las detecciones estándares, donde puedes detectar problemas con anticipación, o sea, tempranamente los puedes ver. Y lo que él recomienda es que siempre que sea posible se deberían de utilizar los gráficos variables.
Claro, los de Levi Jennings, ¿no? Sí,
Sí.
y
Yeah,
creo que va. Sí, perdón, adelante, doctor.
yeah, it's just not because when I present both charts, because they should be applied according, of course, to the different type of tests. Because
Ujú.
if you are using an immunoassay, okay, we have a signal, so you could use a variable chart. But if you are using, for example, a nucleic acid test, when you have a very low signal for negatives and a very high signal for the positives, of course, it's preferable to use variable charts. And another example, for example, for the blood groups, for example, for the ABO group, you don't have a signal, so of course, you should use a variable chart because it's not possible. Sorry, you should use an attribute chart because it's not possible to use variable chart. So, but again, and let me repeat, using only quality control with a low signal.
Ujú. Ujú.
Lo que menciona el doctor es, puso un ejemplo, cuando estás haciendo una muestra de
Grupo
ácido
sanguíneo.
nucleico,
Ujú.
obviamente pues es utilizar los gráficos en ese sentido, variables, pero si estás haciendo a lo mejor algo en un grupo sanguíneo, a lo mejor no es tanto, es posible introducir los gráficos en este tema, pero es dependiendo de la prueba que estés manejando.
Uh-huh. Yo creo que el punto crítico aquí es que tengamos la buena práctica de hacer las gráficas. O sea, no
Claro.
porque tengamos una prueba que sea 100% cualitativa, por ejemplo, algunas PCRs que son 100% cualitativas, que no arrojan variables continuas, es decir, que no nos dan un número, sino que solamente nos dan al final el atributo, está, no está, reactivo, no reactivo, positivo, negativo.
Positivo.
Podemos darle seguimiento con esa información, con un tipo de gráfico que es específicamente de atributos. Pero si tenemos la posibilidad de que esa prueba nos dé una variable continua con un número, pues hay un gráfico de
Mejor.
Levy-Jennings que puede ser mucho más sensible. Entonces, creo que justo es eso de la buena práctica de hacer el gráfico, sea cual sea la interpretación o el resultado tal cual que estamos obteniendo de la prueba. Entonces sí, me encanta la respuesta. Tenemos por acá otra pregunta que es, doctor, ¿qué es mejor? ¿Un control de tercera opinión liofilizado o un control de plasma humano? Supongo que quieren decir líquido.
Well, the phase of the control is critical, because of course we should only use lyophilized materials when it's not possible to use a liquid material. So we should choose always first use a material in liquid condition, because this is according to our practices. Probably some of the technicians already found this problem. I found this one time, because when you need to reconstitute a lyophilized sample, of course you need to use a pipette. So, and our pipette could have very lot of problems, and of course we need technicians with good pipetting skills. And I remember that one time I was on the AACC in Mexico, in Chicago, sorry,
Uh-huh.
and I tried the first time, and I was thinking that I was very good with the pipette. I tried the first time, the result was terrible. So this is just a joke, but when you are during the reconstitution of lyophilized material, of course, there is a big chance to introduce, of course, an error due to the pipette or due to our practice. And I have some problems in my past laboratory, because sometimes we think that the problem was from the equipment or the test, but the problem was, of course, because we are using this material. So, if it's not possible to use another material, so of course you need to use a lyophilized material. But whenever possible, you should use materials in liquid condition. It could be frozen, of course, but in liquid condition.
Uh-huh.
Thank you, doctor. Gisela, pues como lo hemos mencionado, lo hemos platicado en otras ocasiones y lo comenta el doctor, realmente la mejor práctica es usar, obviamente, material que está listo para usarse, que sea líquido. Obviamente es lo mejor. Ya que sea como lo mencionas, lo más cercano a lo que puede mimicar una muestra de paciente, que eso lo
Uh-huh.
sabemos. Utilizando material que es lifolizado, lo que pasa en esas ocasiones es que tienes que reconstituir y obviamente vas a tener o puede pasar, tu oportunidad de error es mucho mayor por la
Uh-huh.
cuestión de que vas a tener que, obviamente, hacer lo que le llamamos el pipete. Entonces, eso constituye, pues, más problemas en la cuestión de confianza en lo que estás haciendo, ¿no? No sé cómo estás haciendo las muestras, sabes que este tiempo se lleva más tiempo para el laboratorio, digo, hay muchos más riesgos en ese sentido. Dice el doctor que él tuvo oportunidad de estar en AACC en Chicago y tuvo la oportunidad de trabajar en unas muestras ahí de control de lifolizado y dice que los resultados salieron malísimos. Entonces ahí es donde vemos que sí hay oportunidades de error cuando estamos manejando el material que no está líquido, ¿no? Que no está, pues digamos, listo para usarse. Ahí son las diferencias. De hecho, yo creo que, doctor, I think that most internationally, just talking about internationally practices, I think most laboratories nowadays they use liquid, ready to use material, correct?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Ujú.
So, como lo comentaba, yo creo que los laboratorios mundialmente, su práctica es usar material que esté listo para usarse, obviamente para mitigar o hacer menor el riesgo en la cuestión de cómo manejas las muestras, ¿no? Entonces, material que esté listo, ya líquido, listo para usarse, es la mejor práctica.
Claro.
Gracias.
Gracias, Ani. Sobre todo en este enfoque de banco de sangre, creo que, porque justo a lo mejor porque veo que algunos que están conectados a lo mejor trabajan en laboratorio clínico y es mucho esta práctica en laboratorio clínico de poder tener materiales liofilizados porque
Oh,
abarcan
sí.
muchos más analitos, ¿no? Pero debemos de no perder el enfoque que cuando hablamos de serología infecciosa, de inmunoensayos o de tamizaje de serología dentro del banco de sangre, siempre una de las principales características que debemos buscar, pues es justo que el material de control que seleccionemos sea lo más trazable a la matriz de muestras humanas, porque eso me va a permitir visualizar si algo le está pasando a mi control, que es exactamente la misma matriz que yo voy a trabajar con mis muestras, puedo entonces correlacionar la variación que estoy observando contra lo que le van a pasar a mis muestras de pacientes o de donadores. Entonces, creo que ese sigue siendo un punto crítico porque pues dentro de las buenas prácticas, pues la selección del material de control siempre es una de las principales actividades para asegurar esta parte del control interno diario del banco de sangre.
El banco de sangre. Como lo comenta el doctor, internacionalmente, lo que vemos en esta cuestión, ya sabes, de usar controles, la mayoría, o sea, lo que es mejor práctica es usar el control listo para usar
Líquido.
el líquido. Ujú.
Listo. Pues listo. No tenemos más preguntas. Por ahí, doctor, usted me va a decir cuál fue la mejor pregunta para regalar el libro. A lo mejor cuál fue la que generó más polémica, le vamos a llamar.
There
Sobre
is no more questions. So
más dudas,
I
¿no?
think, doctor, we're gonna let you pick what was the best question or the most controversial one
That's
that
your choice. That's your choice. Yeah.
it's legal choice. So
Really? Okay, my goodness.
your choice.
I think, sorry, bueno, por nosotros creo que uno de los puntos más críticos que impacta en México, pues es este punto de cómo podemos cumplir con nuestra normatividad oficial mexicana justo en el uso de los materiales de control. Entonces, por ahí me parece que puede ser la pregunta de Ivonne Barrera, que nos dice cuál es nuestra opinión respecto a que el control débil no debe superar 3 veces el punto de corte en la norma oficial mexicana y que justo pues nos ayudó también a tener esta respuesta con una visión a nivel global de qué es lo que sucede, ¿no? ¿Cuál es la correcta interpretación bajo estos lineamientos internacionales, que no es específicamente por un control en particular o por una empresa en particular, sino lo que queremos es alinearnos a las mejores prácticas que se manejan a nivel internacional? Entonces, por ahí, Ivonne Barrera, si me haces favor de compartirme tu contacto para podernos poner de acuerdo, para poderte mandar tu libro, con todo gusto vamos a poder hacerte llegar este importante documento que creo que va a servir mucho para la implementación en el banco de sangre. Y pues bueno, para todos, si no tienen más preguntas, les agradecemos muchísimo que hayan estado con nosotros. Esperamos haber podido resolver algunas de las dudas que ustedes tienen, darles este enfoque de modo internacional con los lineamientos y los estándares que están sucediendo en todo el mundo, porque claro, México no se puede quedar atrás. Creo que tenemos mucho de dónde sacar porque somos muy buenos trabajadores dentro del sector salud y pues tenemos siempre esta intención de seguirnos homologando con las mejores prácticas. Y pues para eso le agradezco mucho al doctor Paulo, que estuvo con nosotros el día de hoy, por todo su conocimiento, por todo su apoyo, por la resolución de las dudas, y también a Ana, por parte de LGC Seraker, que también estuvo con nosotros ayudándonos con este tema de la traducción y la organización del webinar. Entonces, les agradezco mucho a todos, espero que tengan buen día y nos vemos en la próxima. Gracias.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you.